Welcome, everybody, on behalf of the Alef Trust. Good afternoon or evening or morning or night, depending on where you're connecting from. This is Gabriel Fernandez Borsat. I'm Alef Trust Applied Program Leader. I manage the overall coordination of our certificate programs, and I'm co-faculty of our MSc program in Consciousness, Spirituality, and Transpersonal Psychology. We're here today for an open house sessions with Dr. Emma Bragdon. At the Alef Trust, we're very glad that Emma has chosen us to offer his 3-hour workshops and 7-week courses in partnership with us. She's a world authority on recognizing and supporting people in spiritual awakening and spiritual crisis. She's a pioneer in this field with more than 45 years of experience accompanying spiritual seekers and consciousness explorers in their challenging transformative experiences, and has trained more than 100 spiritual immersion coaches. She authored 2 classic books on the subject with 5 others on similar themes. She's the executive director of Integrative Mental Health University. Next, Emma will present his work on the 7-week course on how to effectively support people in spiritual awakening and spiritual crisis, which will start in mid-April, and the 3-hour workshop that she's offering in 2 weeks, both in the Alef Trust. And after that, there will be time for questions from attendees. You can post your questions in the chat box during the session, and I will moderate the Q&A period. Now and during the session, feel free to open your webcam if that's what you want. This way, your experience will be more similar to how the course webinars are delivered. But be aware that this session is being recorded and you may appear in the recording. Thank you, Dr. Bragdon. Hand over to you.
Thank you so much. It's a pleasure to be with you all. And thank you very much for the introduction, Gabriel. I'm delighted to be back with Alef Trust. I enjoyed teaching with you last year and look forward to more this year. I see some familiar faces here and welcome those who are familiar as well as those who are new to me. And I have prepared some slides. So if you would just wait a minute for a little housekeeping, I'll get those slides together and we'll get on with it. Okay, so we're going to be speaking about spiritual awakening and spiritual crisis today. And I'd like to just say a little bit more about who I am, go through some definitions. We'll talk a little bit about categories of spiritual awakening and the catalyst for it. I'll go dip into where conventional psychiatry and psychology is in reference to awakening and spiritual crisis. We'll speak a little bit about the education that's needed at this point. I have a little time to talk about caring for someone in spiritual emergency, but it's a big topic. And we will go, I will towards the end go into opportunities for further learning, my contact information, and we'll have some time for Q&A. So in terms of who I am, I received my PhD in transpersonal psychology back in 1987. And my dissertation was on helping people in spiritual emergency. So I've been at this for a long time. I started the Integrative Mental Health University in 2013 in order to bring more attention to the importance to bring spirituality into mental health care. And I've been teaching this kind of topic since 1990. So I have done extensive research in Brazil, and one of the reasons I was called there and extremely interested is because they have devised ways, cultivated ways, I should say, to help people in spiritual emergency, which I think go far beyond what's offered in the United States, UK, and Europe. So I am a bridge to bringing some of that knowledge to us all. I have authored 7 books and co-produced 2 documentary films, one on Spiritism in Brazil. And one of the things I bring to this, which I think is quite important, is that I have experienced all categories of awakening that are described in the course materials. On a personal level, I'm a mother, I'm a grandmother, and I can claim to be an elder at this point. So the books I think that are most relevant for us today are the at the top left, a source book for helping people with spiritual problems. This has to do with identifying spiritual awakening as well as looking at caring for people who are in the awakening process and might be feeling distress. It's still used in some graduate schools. And The Call of Spiritual Emergency towards the center was a book I was invited to write by one of our major publishing houses. They wanted to hear more about narratives, not as much about the academic side, but more about give us some stories. Tell us what happens in the beginning of an awakening, what happens at a crisis point, and what happens when someone has adequate and effective support. So that The Call of Spiritual Emergency is really about stories. The other 2 books on the upper right are about Spiritism, if you're interested, and the cover of the DVD of one of the films I co-produced is on the bottom right. If you want to just know more about these books and figure out how to read them or get a hold of the documentary film, the URL is right there. So let's get into some definitions. Um, the most important definition probably for us today is what is a spiritual experience? And the way I look at it is it's an experience that takes us beyond the 5 senses. In other words, it's beyond the zone where we usually orient ourselves, and it opens us and expands into what we are now calling the 6th sense. Some people will just associate that with intuition, but it's seeing beyond into some zones that people never reach into, but some people who have developed the 6th sense will reach into. It goes beyond our social conditioning and beyond what the constructs of the ego, our sense of how we identify ourselves. So some examples, a vision of a greater reality, including one's future or the future of the earth or someone else's future. Another example, communication with spirit guides, or some people will communicate very distinctly with a higher power that they feel very connected to, but others can't see, feel, or connect with. Same with the spirit guides. Another example, specific sensing of another person's reality. So that's taking empathy to a very, very high degree. Some people will be able to sense what's going on with another person without them saying anything about themselves or appearing or gesturing in any way that indicates how they're feeling or what they're thinking. So this level of empathy takes a person into a tremendous amount of interconnectedness and ultimately can provide someone with a sense of oneness with nature, with animals, with other people, and even the possibility of oneness with all that is, which some people will call God. Another example is profound inspiration manifesting through poetry, music, technology, and a host of other ways, dance, etc. So these are just examples. Of course, spiritual experiences occur in many, many ways, but I hope this gives you a felt sense of it. It's important to remember that the spiritual experiences can occur at any time and can occur to people at any age. So they may come through certain practices aimed at altering consciousness, like meditation or yoga or the use of psychedelics and plant medicines, but they also can occur obviously through near-death experience or with some children even as a remembering of who they were before they were born and a sense of not only the truth of it, but the need to really communicate about it. So let's go into now some definitions about awakening. Awakening is oftentimes called spiritual emergence, and it is actually a process. Some people will say, well, I have awakened already, and refer to one or more experiences. But from my point of view, it's a process that may take us our whole life. One of my teachers, a Zen Buddhist abbot, said, enlightenment is possible, but we also have to, after enlightenment, we have to choose to come from that particular point of view at every second. So it's not something that is one and done. We have found a variety of different words to describe what is at the end of the process of awakening. And the word enlightenment might be familiar to some of you, or self-realization. And I think it's up for grabs at this point what word or words are going to be used universally to define this kind of endpoint or the goalposts, as it were. One thing that's quite astounding, I think, these days is that at least 41% of adults in the United States have experienced a spiritual awakening. And so in the more recent past, people have felt ambivalent about even speaking about spiritual awakening because it has oftentimes been associated by conventional psychiatry and psychology as indicative of maybe hallucinations or delusions or psychosis. But there's more research being done now. And in fact, in 2024, it was published in one particular book, which I'll give you reference to in a little in the next slide, I think, that there are probably about 65% of adults who are experiencing this awakening. So from my point of view, certainly more and more people are moving into this zone, and more people then are also having some distress because of our thinking in the past that it might be related to mental illness. But as people awaken, they do start identifying more with their wisdom self, oftentimes called the higher self or the soul, rather than the ego. And they begin to see more that the ego is actually a construct of many different beliefs of who we are, but it doesn't necessarily get to the bottom line of who we are. When we go through these awakening times, there's the possibility of a profound psychospiritual transformation. So for some people, let's say a person who might want to explore taking psychedelics, it might be just a wow, that they don't want to integrate. They just want to see something that was exceptional. But for those who want to really integrate it and find ways to integrate their experience, it can involve a profound psychospiritual transformation that moves through every aspect of their life. It typically then brings new values, new beliefs, new priorities, and thus it can be extremely positive. A spiritual crisis is not necessarily going to happen in everyone's spiritual awakening process. So you don't need to go through a spiritual crisis in order to be in an awakening process. Spiritual crisis is sometimes called spiritual emergency, and it involves a disorientation or distress that can be extremely debilitating. From my own point of view, there are times when I open up in a new way through my meditation, and I can feel disoriented for just a few seconds or so, but I have found techniques that will help me ground and help me to integrate quite quickly. So it's not particularly debilitating. However, imagine someone, and um, I'll tell you the story of a woman by the name of Lauren, who suddenly opened up to all kinds of awakening phenomena. And it was extremely difficult for her to keep any sense of grounding. And she felt extremely confused. She had no language for it. She had no one to talk to. And she had to really take time out and deal with her disorientation by herself for a long period of time. So in a spiritual emergency, it can also happen that previous traumas can show up again, kind of knocking at the door and saying, we need to be integrated. We need to be looked at. This is also part of you. So some people will call that a purification that comes along with a spiritual crisis. And it can also come, of course, come along with an awakening, whereby someone may be having awakening experiences and then tune into some of the trauma that they've had, but it won't be overwhelming. When this situation becomes overwhelming is when there's a spiritual crisis, and people really need support at that point. If they get, if we get the support that is appropriate for us, the outcome of a spiritual awakening or a spiritual emergency is greater peace, self-acceptance, deeper connection with all of life as well as with ourselves. Some people will call that now human flourishing. So during the course that I give over weeks, we go into the 13 categories of experiences that people may have as they're opening up in their awakening process. But for today, I'm just going to touch down into one briefly, but I've selected one that seems to be happening more and more frequently these days. So a psychic opening is what we're calling it, and it's an opening in perceptual fields. Again, it relates to the sixth sense or the third eye, which is located between the two eyebrows. And a person may open to subtle perception. So that might mean that suddenly they have an experience whereby a being of a higher intelligence is literally speaking to them, what we call channeling, if the person in question here is willing to speak out loud what it is that's coming through to them. It can also involve clairvoyance, in other words, seeing things that other people are not seeing. Clairvoyance might involve seeing the energy field around a tree, seeing the energy field around a person that connotes something about what they're feeling and what they're experiencing. Clairaudience can again be hearing things that other people are not hearing, that may be channeling from spirit guides, but it also can be picking up information in other ways that comes from a higher intelligence. Clairsentience is feeling with a great deal of empathy what another person is feeling, and this might extend itself even to remote sensing. In other words, you may have heard of people being able to feel at a distance what's going on with another person. There's some wonderful stories of people experiencing the death of a parent who might be thousands of miles away, but the person who's having the experience has had no contact at all with the person who's dying, and yet senses that is exactly what's happening, and then hears shortly thereafter that that's what's going on. So clairsentience can be extremely positive for someone who wants to be a body worker or an energy worker. But when it first comes on, it can be a bit disorienting. So it's also possible that someone is able to have a sense through taste or smell of something that is invisible or imperceptible to others. A friend of mine who is a geomancer will go into a place that it has had absolutely wonderful rituals and is of a very high vibration. And she says, even though there are no roses there, it's as if the whole place is full of roses, and so I smell the roses. And in a similar sense, she might go into a place that where something very negative has happened, and she says, I just get a bad taste in my mouth. Something terrible has happened here. So these are referred oftentimes to the clairs, clairvoyance, clairaudience, clairsentience, etc. So as I was mentioning a bit about the story of Lauren, it can be absolutely frightening at first, especially when these perceptual abilities have been repressed and or one's culture, one's family doesn't accept them as being real. So what's a person supposed to do if all of a sudden they're sensing what's going on with other people, for instance, and being able to see very clearly what's happening with someone without that person maybe even acknowledging for themselves what's going on? It can seem invasive, and for children who have this particular ability, it can seem a bit confusing. In other words, they might pick up what their mother is actually feeling and confuse it with their own feelings. So the child loses a sense of any sort of boundary at all. So, of course, this can be quite confusing for children as well as adults when they move into this kind of ability. Now, the most positive aspect of the psychic opening is it is an entry point into what has been called Christ consciousness or mystical experience, because as one goes into this and hopefully learns how to harness it, which is extremely important, there can be a feeling of union with love itself, an intuitive felt sense of being one with all living beings. And of course, when a person harnesses this ability and is not overwhelmed by it, then it can lead to tremendous wisdom, compassion, and a desire to be in service. So just to dip in now to something around the catalysts of spiritual emergence or spiritual awakening. One thing that I've found are that many people who come to take this course from me are actually highly sensitive people. And so Elaine Aron, a psychologist, wrote a book in 2013, and then a film was created about her work in 2015, because she did some tremendous work on identifying what she calls HSP, or highly sensitive persons. And what she was able to find through her research is 20% of all people all over the world, men and women equally, 20% are highly sensitive people, which means they have the capacity and to become the pioneers, the oracles and the guides for us. So this particular aspect of a human being can be identified even prenatally. And one of the things, well, several of the qualities that we associate with this are that these people have a desire to process life at a very, very deep level. So the children will be asking penetrating questions. What is death? What happens at death? At a pretty young age, and likely be very persistent. So this continues on later in life, of course, as a teenager and young adult, as well as adult, continues to process life at a very deep level, asking for or reading about, asking for information about life and death. The HSP tend to be overstimulated quite easily. So taking a child into a big box store or taking a child into a huge athletic event where there's lots of noise might make that person quite uncomfortable. Same with the adults. And most HSPs are more empathic than the average person. That's not to say that the average person has no empathy or is not sensitive, but only to say that the HSP is more empathic and tends to sense subtleties. So Elaine Aron herself did not use the language of spiritual emergence or spiritual awakening or even psychic sensitivities, but she has, in more private situations, mentioned that there is definitely a tendency of the HSP to move in these directions of opening to more psychic perceptions. The unfortunate thing is that these people, even though they have such profound abilities, are in a they are the non-dominant people in a dominant culture that does not have these abilities or these ways of moving through life. So the children, especially who are HSP, will need a more just reassurance that they're okay, that it's okay to ask the questions, that it's okay to be processing life as they are, and to sense that they're somewhat different than other people. So another catalyst that has meant a lot to me as I work with a lot of people who are in this process is the notion that comes out of ancient Hinduism. In other words, it's more than thousands of years old, that we are have just been in the Kali Yuga, which is a dark age. And you can see, I think, the illustration here, which shows that we are moving into the Dwapara age. So in the dark age, we don't believe that anything that can't be measured by the five senses is real. And there's an adamant notion, sometimes called scientism, that is the way that this world works, and that we have to recognize that there is no higher spiritual truth. But in the Dwapara Yuga, which we are already into at least by 200 years, but we're in transition to, there are spontaneous awakenings. And so unity consciousness or mystical communion is becoming more available to people, but in a spontaneous way. In other words, if they were educated in the more Kali Yuga frame of reference, then they don't have any kind of conceptual framework or grounding to understand what's happening to them. In the Dwapara age, there will be spontaneous psychic openings, channeling, mental telepathy, people moving into mediumship, people fascinated by mediumship. And even though this was, Einstein gave us this notion over 100 years ago, it becomes more and more real to people that energy is more primary than material reality. So there's a major shift in orientation, but most important to recognize that in this age, which we are sharing together now, there are going to be a lot of spontaneous awakenings without necessarily people having any kind of grounding to orient themselves. So I just suggest to you that you take a moment for self-reflection right now. And please share in the chat box if you would like to. You don't have to. Or you might just jot down some personal notes, or you might just self-reflect for a bit. Have you recently had any unusual or profound experiences that felt spiritual or otherworldly in nature? And have you been experiencing intense emotions or thoughts that seem to be related to spiritual or existential questions? Are you finding it difficult to reconcile your spiritual experiences with your current beliefs, values, or life experience? Gabriel, could you please change the viewing so that I could see the chat box? I don't.
I think you can see it. Maybe you need to click on the chat icon in the.
Oh, unfortunately, that doesn't show up for me.
Okay, do you want me to
Oh,
read?
here, just a minute. I think I see it.
Okay.
Yeah, here we go. Thank you. Um, okay, so a couple people. Thank you very much. So I'll go on from here. Not a lot of people have been sharing, but I hope you've taken a moment to just do a little self-reflection and get a sense if things are moving and changing in your own life. So let's take a look now at what conventional psychology has to offer. So religion and spirituality, from the point of view of the DSM, the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual of Mental Disorders, says all spiritual experiences or religious experiences belong to culture. So culture does include language and religion and spirituality, family structures, life cycle stages, ceremonial rituals and customs. But it doesn't necessarily say that this is a universal experience that can move many people no matter what culture they're in. So the good news in a way is that we do have something at the back of the book of the DSM as well as the ICD, which notes that the religion and spirituality can impact or color a pathology, but are not indicative of pathologies. So these spiritual experiences are no longer necessarily being called symptoms of psychosis. And we do have from the DSM something called the cultural formation interview, which is advised so that psychotherapists, psychiatrists, and healthcare providers have to recognize that this is a very important part of a person's life, and they need to bring it into their assessment of a person, as well as the conversation they're having with a person. But it's not mandated. In other words, people in the position of being healthcare providers do not have to give a cultural formation interview or move into what is going on with a person from a spiritual point of view. And unfortunately, what that can lead to is misdiagnosis and inappropriate treatments for lack of training and guidance. So, as I mentioned, both the ICD-11 and DSM-5-TR do contain diagnostic and billing codes for spiritual or religious problem, but there is no definitive resource on the experiences and phenomena which the various traditions and religions and cultural contexts consider as normal, expected, desirable, or pathological. So we're in a position right now where we don't have that kind of a resource, and yet we're asking, in many cases, healthcare workers to respond adequately to our request for support if we are having spiritual awakening phenomena. And we're asking them also to correctly differentiate them from pathology. But we're asking them to do something that they have no training in. And providers now, especially when so much is going on, so many more people are reporting spiritual awakening phenomena, providers need to become competent in diagnosis and treatment of spiritual issues. Without that, we could say that there's a possibility that healthcare providers will miss the boat. So we're saying that the spiritual awakening, when it is treated, when it is managed in the most appropriate way and given appropriate support, can lead to human flourishing. And yet we aren't training our healthcare providers to acknowledge what this is all about, what the awakening process is, what the possibility for human flourishing is, and what appropriate management is. So there's a tremendous need for education. And not only so that more providers will use the cultural formulation interview, but also to bring more providers into the zone of understanding what this is about, possibly having more personal experiences, having more access to those who can report about their awakenings, so to sensitize themselves to what this is about and provide training. Otherwise, they will tend to discount spiritual experiences and awakening. So the question becomes then also for the people who are going through this, where can they go to get help or support? And what does society miss out on when there's insufficient support for human flourishing? So we have to recognize too that most of the public has had no introduction to spiritual awakening, what it is, what the process is about, what it leads to, and the possibility of increased human flourishing in the public at large when we support this appropriately. And I do just want to mention that I hear from many people that who are going through this process, if and when they contact more conventional healthcare providers, they may in fact be hospitalized and given medication, and it can lead to a whole other level of trauma that a person has to take care of, on top of the trauma that they may be faced with needing to integrate, which they haven't integrated yet, and on top of the fact that they're having spiritual experiences. So just right away, I want to give you the address for the directory of coaches that I've trained as spiritual emergence coaches. And you see here over on the right, imhu.org/coaching/directory. And there are about 140 coaches from around the world that I've trained. So, of course, what we're here to do today is also talk about opportunities for training at Alef Trust and IMHU. So the opportunities for future learning through Alef Trust are at this point twofold. One is a 7-week course, How to Effectively Support People in Spiritual Awakening and Spiritual Crisis. And this will be happening April 14th to May 26th from 7 to 8:30 p.m. in the UK on Tuesdays. And prior to that longer course, some of you may be interested in taking a 3-hour workshop, which will, when you pay for it, that also will give you credit toward the 7-week course. And it will be live on Saturday, February 28th from 3 to 6 p.m. in the UK. So a little bit about what is the contents of the information that I will be giving. You'll learn to describe the positive transformative outcomes in spiritual crisis in a variety of ways. Most importantly, discover models to manage it appropriately so that you can improve the way you offer support. There will be people who are people with lived experience who just want to understand more about the territory, and we welcome them to this course, as well as those people who are in a professional situation of being counselors, psychotherapists, psychiatrists, healthcare providers of all stripes, that the course is really oriented towards you being able to bring very practical information into your work with other people. So you will be able to understand the 13 categories of awakening. I just went into one a little bit today. You'll also be able to recognize the 9 catalysts of awakening. I went into only 1 or 2 of those today. And most importantly, you'll be able to become more competent in assessment and management. For those of you who are really enthusiastic about learning more and being able to provide more, this particular course, the 7-week course, is a prerequisite to the 2-day workshop to become a spiritual emergence coach. And I'll be giving that particular course in London in September of this year. So the materials will include a screening tool so you can more easily identify if someone is in an awakening process, a practical chart to help you differentiate spiritual crisis and pathology, which goes right to the heart of what becomes one of the most difficult issues to deal with as a healthcare provider who needs to make assessments. We also give a practical summary of care that can assist a person to remember what we've gone through in the course and be able to provide it more easily to those that you're caring for. There'll be guided self-reflection so you can understand more about your own process and thus be able to translate to others more of your own understanding from a personal point of view. There is information on how other cultures successfully support awakening. So we're really looking at a transcultural perception that this is universal and affects people of all cultures. Many people say how important the opportunities to network and discuss with other students has been, just to be able to share different points of view. And also look into video interviews of those who've experienced spiritual crisis and resolved it well. We give an abundance of additional resources for reading and viewing, and also quizzes to reinforce the learning. So these courses that are offered through the Alef Trust are all online. And in the 7-week seminar, there'll be 6 sessions, each of 90 minutes. So the time you need can be 90 minutes for the session itself, but then there's adjacent supportive online materials, which may take about 45 minutes per week for you to go over. Again, everyone is welcome to this, people with lived experience and those that care for them, family, friends, and counselors and healthcare providers. And as mentioned, we really aim to make the tools very accessible and very practical so that those who are healthcare providers can use them immediately in their work with others. And on completion, there is a professional certificate that is given by Alef Trust. So moving right along to contact information, if you have further questions, please don't hesitate to contact me at eb@imhu.org. If you want to look more into the organization that I founded, Integrative Mental Health University, the URL is imhu.org. If you want more information on becoming certified as a spiritual emergence coach through IMHU, the URL is there, or you can also just go right to our website, and it's listed under professionals. So I want to thank you very much for your attention, and I'm going to come back to you so that we can do a bit of Q&A if you have questions. Okay, here we are. So in the past, Gabriel, you've read some of what's gone on in the chat box to me. Would you like to do that again? And we can ask people if they have more questions to raise their hand and identify themselves.
Yes. Yeah, some people have asked give details about the 3-hour course, live course again. And the Charlie has provided the direct link in our website for that. So I suggest people just can find in the reactions button the way to raise their hand, or you just open your microphone and ask the question for Emma. Who wants to break the ice first? No. Yeah. Gabby, for
All
example,
downhill from what? I don't know. So what did you think 9-11 was then?
yes, Gabby, you can open your microphone and ask your question.
Yeah. Hi.
Hi.
So one of the questions I had, so I'm a practicing intuitive, so all of this has been everything you described as a child, this has just always been normal to me. So I didn't know that it was anything different because that's my experience and my mom, my grandmother. So it's just been normal. But I'm supporting someone my daughter, who's also very intuitive. And what I was wondering is, would this help me be able to support her and maybe my clients as well?
That's an interesting question, Gabby. So, especially since you were already highly intuitive,
Yeah.
as you've been intuitive since you were a child. Uh, my guess is that you have a good inner sense of what might be helpful for other people
Mhm.
because you know the territory. You know, it for people who don't know the territory and aren't especially intuitive, it can be really difficult to answer the question. Um, but then on the other hand, when people are highly intuitive, it usually expresses itself in particular ways. In other words, they might be intuitive about some things, but not so much about others.
Yes.
Is that so for you?
Well, yeah, especially when it's directly with your own family as opposed to being more objective. Like if I'm working with
Yes.
other people, and that's what I do professionally. I'm working with other people, but when it's yourself and because you have your
Yeah,
own blind spots, so
right.
for yourself.
So I'll tell you one thing that I have been told numerous times by people who've taken the course is they didn't realize how lost they were without the words to describe what's going on. And it's not like IMHU has the only or the right words and nobody else does, but we have a conceptual framework that hangs together that's not particularly difficult. Young people can understand it as well as older people. And so I'm not suggesting that a child take the course, but I am suggesting that if you were to take the course, you might feel a sense of um, better organization around what this whole field is about and an ability to communicate in a way that is more grounding for a young person because it can be very difficult, as you probably know, for young people
Yes.
to get to orient and feel comfortable about their gifts if they don't have language for it or for themselves, just to talk to themselves, much less talk to another person.
Yeah.
And and many of the young people will say, if I open my mouth about this in school and talk to some of my
Mhm.
friends, they're just going to say I'm nuts and to
Yeah.
shut up or be quiet or something. Just don't talk about it. So it breaking through some of the isolation for kids is really important. So your reaching out is fantastic. And I think the course would offer you some words and some organization to offer to kids to give them more grounding and less a sense of isolation.
Okay. All right. Thank you.
Yeah. Uh-huh. Fiona?
Thank you. Well, first of all, thank you for the overview. It was really helpful.
Oh, good.
I've got a couple of questions. Someone's actually asked about Stanislav Grof and Christina. I just is there any work going on there still with what they're
Maybe a
doing? And then I
wedge.
have one other question after that, if that's all right.
Okay. Um, I don't know where we're getting a lot of back
No.
noise,
Yeah.
but I'll try to answer your
Thank you.
question. So Christina Groff passed away a number of years ago.
Mm,
Stan Groff is now remarried. Stan is in his 90s, and he does have uh, Groff legacy training that is available in some parts of the world. And I have had someone who was a trainer in the Groff Legacy training actually come to take the courses and become a spiritual emergence coach. And
okay.
her attitude towards what they're offering in the legacy training is that yes, spiritual emergence and emergency is definitely spoken about, but they don't go into a lot of depth because there's
Okay.
so much other information that's covered. So
Okay.
she ended up the coach training, being certified, saying, I want to work with you. I want to collaborate. I want to bring more of this into what her own work was about, because the Groff legacy training, I think, is quite systematized.
Okay. Can I just ask one more question then? A friend of mine, Scott, has gone through a sort of spiritual awakening, but she's feeling a sense of complete nothingness, and it's almost like she's lost a reference point here. Have you got any sort of pointers on with I mean I'm interested in the course anyway, but if you've got any pointers on what would help her?
Yeah, so um, I'm sorry to hear that she's having a hard time, but it can be that a person does some kind of a practice. And these days, there are Advaita teachers who are teaching that it is really a good idea to get rid of the ego
Mm,
and to transcend the ego completely. So I'm not countering that and saying bad idea, but I'm saying that when people actually move into a state where they don't identify anymore with their ego,
mm,
that it can be extremely disorienting, and that the teaching that I would prefer people get is more, yes, if we solely identify with the ego, then it leads to a very limited perspective of life and a very limited way of taking in life. But if we appreciate the ego for what it offers us, which in some ways is grounding, driving a car safely, being able to go into a store and shop for what we need, etc. If we appreciate the ego for what it offers us, but also create a space in our life, which may be through meditation or some other form of spiritual practice that allows us to move into the transcendent, then we can have both. But the people who have lost their orientation towards the ego are left with a sense of, well, what now? And
mm,
a friend of mine actually, who was following an Advaita teacher, and I'm not here to put down all Advaita teachers, but there have been some who have been very strong about the need to completely let go of the ego. Anyway, this woman who is ended up in the psych ward because she
mm,
completely lost her orientation.
mm, mm,
So, Fiona, working with your friend to just assist her with grounding may
mhm.
be a very essential, easy first step.
Okay,
Take a
thank
walk,
you.
take a walk, get near your
Mm,
feet, be conscious of your feet touching the earth,
mm.
things of that nature.
Brilliant. Thank you very much. Thanks.
Yeah, you're welcome. Anna Marie? Where's Anna Marie?
Anna Marie, you're muted, so you need to
I'm
unmute.
sorry about that. Yeah, I think my questions were answered. I was curious about the relationship to spiritual practices and these emergencies, and also about the facility that Stanislav Grof has. And you say they are connected, and he still has legacy trainings around the
Correct.
world. So it's just a matter of doing research. So thank you.
Okay. All right. All right. Sure. Um, I see a physical hand and I see a
Queen of
yellow
Fairies.
Yeah,
hand. I
Judith
think
was first in the row. Then we will come.
uh, Darren, I'll call you next. I think Judy was
Picture
mine.
um, the pen.
Yeah,
Can I go?
Judy?
Yes,
I don't know.
thank you.
Yes, please.
Um, I'm a retired mental health counselor, and over the past 15 years or so, I've been following you, Emma,
Oh,
and the work that you do. I even wanted to go to Brazil with you at one time, but just couldn't pull it together. I've also learned a lot through the spiritism study and movement. Um,
mhm.
And I've also learned a lot from a woman by the name of Wendy McCarty. I don't know if you're familiar with her,
No,
the work that she does with very young children. And I just looked up the name of the book, but I forget it again. But my question or my interest is primarily in very young children. And I would say, you mentioned prenatal, uh, which seems kind of crazy, but not to me. But prenatal, newborn, preverbal, and then the very young, up until about the age of 7. And, I'm sure you and probably everyone here is aware of sort of the spiritual connectedness or difference in consciousness states that very young children exhibit, whether it's, remembering past lives or, lives before being born, in, let's say, in heaven. Uh, my biggest interest and concern with these children is that I think that more and more of them are being born with
That's challenging, easier.
with less of a veil of forgetfulness and more awareness of who they are and where they come from and what they know about spirituality and consciousness and all things we call paranormal. But they're being born into a world that does not accept the non-dominant, as you call them, and are being born into families with parents who don't know really much about this at all. And I'm wondering how much the work that you do or the courses that you offer, or maybe other materials or places that I could explore, um, work or do work extensively with this age group, if you want to call it that. There's so much that is going to be lost by the time these very young children, emerge into, preteens and teenagers and lost adults. And a lot of autistic children are probably individuals that we could characterize the way you have here. But we look at them as damaged. So where can we get started with this process for these very young children who are telling us what they know and accepting what they know as a kind of a truth?
So Judith, it's a very compelling question. Thank you for asking it. And I think it's extremely important. And it falls in line with what I was saying about the Kali Yuga versus the Dwapara
Right.
Yuga. So there are more children being born with more certainty about a wider perspective on what's real, what's true, and
Right.
where they've come from, and what the possibilities are in terms of where they're going. IMHU is doing everything that we can to train spiritual emergence coaches who can also be available to really young kids. But we have not extended ourselves into that particular kind of work that you're talking about. But if you go now through ChatGPT or AI and ask the questions that you're asking me, I think you will come up with a number, a quite high number of people who are doing this kind of work. And if you use some of the language like crystal children, to
Indigo children.
indigo children, yes. So you can find more people who are creating conversations, but conversations that will lead parents into really empowering the kids. One thing IMHU is just about to launch are courses for teenagers, 16 to 24, who are trying to sort out what to do with spiritual experiences and what to do if they feel disoriented or distressed because what they're experiencing does not fit into what they're learning in school or university. So we're attempting to move in that direction, but there's a lot on our plate right now. Thank you for your question. Yeah. Was it Darren? Yes, Darren?
Hi, can you hear me?
Yeah, I can hear you well.
Okay, good. For the past about 20 years, I've been a minister and a spiritual counselor.
Uh-huh.
I've also been a peer counselor. I was a peer
Okay.
counselor for 8 years. My question revolves around can spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency and pathology like psychosis, with me, for example, it was bipolar disorder, be like kind of one and the same, where the bipolar biochemical imbalance is like a natural psychedelic experience that creates the spiritual emergence and spiritual emergency. For me, it's definitely a hereditary trait. My grandfather had it, my father has it, my uncle has it, and I have it. At least of those relatives I know of. Oh, and my great grandmother had it. Um, so I'm just wondering, can pathological psychosis and spiritual emergency kind of be one and the same?
Well, that's a big question, isn't it, Darren?
Yeah.
And especially for someone like yourself with that kind of history in your family. So I hesitate to make any kind of generalization that but a broad generalization, but I do know of people who have bipolar running through their family where some of the people, in other words, not everyone in the family was interviewed, but some of the people were having very strong spiritual experiences. And someone might say, well, that's part of the mania that happens within bipolar, and so just throw it away. It's useless. It doesn't make any sense at all. It will never be of value. And unfortunately, I have another way of looking at it, which is that it could very well be that people who are bipolar or diagnosed as bipolar are having some very valuable spiritual experiences, but they're also having a great deal of difficulty integrating them because there's so much going on in their emotional lives. So uh, I I can just say, please look at what you already have likely looked at, which is validating that you are having spiritual experiences, but don't try to make a generalization that it may be happening with all people who are bipolar. So, for instance, this is just a brief anecdote. I was sitting next to someone in an airplane at one point, and they asked me what I do, and I told them, and they said, "Oh, curious. We thought our dad was bipolar for 3 years towards the end of his life. He was just exhibiting all the things that someone with bipolar would exhibit. Well, he passed away, and he was given an autopsy, and they found out that he had a brain tumor. And that was causing some of them. And so I think it's very difficult to make generalizations. But certainly when someone is having very strong spiritual experiences and they're not able to sleep, they're not able to get much rest, they're not able to ground easily, it can quite easily be called mania, and someone may be given a diagnosis of bipolar. Whether that's always the right diagnosis or not is very complicated to sort out, and I would hesitate to do that unless I was talking to the person themselves over a period of time. Sorry, I can't be more explicit, but
No, no, that's very helpful. Thank you very much.
you're welcome. Any other questions? Comments?
Okay. Emma, I'm just posting now in the chat the two links, the link to the 7-week course that will start mid-April, and the link to the 3-hour workshop that you will offer in 2 weeks, Saturday, February 28th. And just let me clarify, you said it, but just to clarify that if you register, if any of you register for the 3-hour workshop, then you will be able to reuse in full its fee for the 7-week certificate course. Also, an important aspect is that we will not record the workshop that's happening in 2 weeks on February 28th, because participants may share personal information and we want to ensure confidentiality and provide a safe space. But all the webinars in the 7-week course are recorded and shared with the participants, because all participants commit to a confidentiality agreement at the beginning of the course. So it's a different situation, right? Okay. If there are no more questions, we will close the session now. I have just seen that it seems our platform is experiencing some technical issues today for them to register in the 3-hour workshop. So I just reported this to the platform. I hope they will solve this very, very quickly, which is what they do usually. Okay, it seems Kearney wants to ask a question. Emma?
Okay.
Courtney?
Yeah, Courtney.
Yeah.
I can't hear you, Courtney. You're muted.
Don't know how to unmute yourself. I will try to do it from my position, but you have to authorize unmuting.
There we are. There we are. I just wondered if you could repeat the date of the workshop in London in in September, I think it is.
Yes, I'm just looking right now in my book, and it's the 12th and 13th of September.
Thank you.
You're
Thank you.
welcome.
I live and work in Scotland, and it makes it a bit difficult to get across to the west coast of
Oh,
America. 12th and 13th. Okay, yes.
yes, yes.
I hope to see you then.
Great, wonderful.
Bye.
Any other last questions before we say goodbye? Okay, well, Gabi, yeah.
Yeah. So I guess worsening health issues that's normal with spiritual awakenings and emergencies. Oh,
Not necessarily. It
not
does
necessarily.
happen for some people, Gabi.
Mhm.
For instance, some people just don't find that they know how to or can take time out unless they get sick.
Oh,
And I'm
interesting.
not saying that that's always the reason, but
Yeah.
with a profound spiritual awakening where someone is really being tested in terms of their values and what their purpose is in life and what's meaningful, generally we need to take time out, right, to sort this out.
Yeah.
And if we don't, actually, it can make us ill because there's so much going on a psychological and psychic level
Mm.
that it's begging us to take the time out to sort things.
Okay.
So,
That makes
yeah.
sense. All right. Thank you so much. I appreciate you.
Yeah. Okay, Gabi. So, it's been a pleasure to be with all of you. Thank you for attending. I look forward to being with some of you later on. And just thank you for your time, and blessings to you on your journey.